break us into a discussion, and I'll start taking questions in about maybe 30, 40 minutes from now.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming during such a difficult time, you know, rush hour, fire and metro, upcoming Pope of Rome. Like, thank you, I really appreciate. So I wanted to start with the words of thanks to RAND Corporation, which sponsored my visit here and invited me, and to Olga Oliker here present personally. Thank you very much, I really appreciate. And also to Wilson Center for giving me this excellent opportunity to share with you and with whole world, since it's broadcasting live. Yeah, this is my first experience. That's why I feel rather timid a little bit because of this magic, mysterious black box. That's why if sometimes you will detect some whims, you know, be merciful. Yeah. And since I'm not a classical academic, we always like to joke in our inner circle at CAST that we are almost private military company, but without striking component, because we just do things, and the majority of our clients, defense industry organizations. And recently I was elected executive director of kind of Russian analog with all, as French people say, avec toute la distance gardée, National Rifle Association. That's why, like, I'm very particular beast, you know. You'll probably feel it. Yeah. So I will start my presentation with two quotes, which probably would be familiar, at least some of them, to those who spend part of their life in studying Russia and Soviet Union. The first one is phrase attributed to Chancellor Bismarck, that Russia is never as weak as it looks like, and Russia is never as strong as it looks like. Yeah, my limited experience of 19 years studying defense industry and arms trade and some collateral issues, like 100% prove this thesis. The second one, I don't know how to put it correctly in English, that's why I first pronounce it in Russian, and then I will try to self-translate, and those who are more proficient in this job probably will correct me. Very famous Russian philosopher Lossev, who died at the end of 80s and who started his career as a pandit under old regime before the revolution, very often like to say, не все банальное плохо, а много из банального истина. Not all banal things are bad, and some of the banalities are just the truth. Yeah, that's why if in my presentation you will hear some things which probably will sound as a conventional wisdom, do believe me, we suffered this wisdom. You know, I wish to be more provocative, more, how should I put it, more original. But I think there are so many usual suspects who come here and try to be original. That's why I can afford myself the luxury of being banal. Yeah? So, on this high note, we switch to our subject. Before I share with you my thoughts about Russian defense industry, I would like to tell you that the development of Russian defense industry is very deep-rooted with the history of development of Russian defense industry. Yeah? To my humble opinion, Soviet Union collapsed. It's a peak of its technological might. But many people who now involved in defense industry, both as an engineers, as a managers, political decision makers, let's take Putin for example, they all remember only this period of, let's say, 2.5 decades, where Soviet Union was, let's say, at peak of its technological might, and was largely auto-sufficient. And many things which Warsaw Pact allies did, they did not because they developed it very well, although there were good technologies, but because Soviet Union in its pervert family tried to give work to some people, like for example, advanced jet trainers were traditionally done by Czech Republic, by Czechoslovakia at that time, at Aerovdochody. But Soviets had its own advanced jet trainers of several generations, and now we have Yakovlev 130. Yeah. So starting, let's say, from Ivan III, the first prince of centralized Russia, Russia always had some Western partner as a technology giver. Yeah. Sometimes it could have been one of the German kingdoms, I don't know how to say. Sometimes it was Sweden, sometimes it was France, and it was, for example, largely United States of America. Many Russians know the glorious failure of cruiser Varyak in Chemulpo harbor during the Russo-Japanese War, but majority of them doesn't know that it was American designed and constructed in Philadelphia cruiser. Yeah? So these facts, historians, general public, and politicians, they like to remember then they need it for political use. Once they don't need it, they put it aside. A tremendous injection of Western technologies Soviet Union got during the Land-Lease programs. And all Soviet historians always like to claim that Land-Lease was only 4 or 5% or whatsoever, probably in a turnover. Yeah? But when you see on a picture Valentine tank late November by Moscow, you understand how crucial it was. And at least specialists, your humble servant and my team, we all remember about it. Recently, I went to St. Petersburg to Artillery Museum, and I saw radio and communications. When I saw radio and communication systems, which was delivered to Soviet Union from 41 to September until capitulation of Japan, 45, you see how performant, starting from characteristics up to design. It reminds me of the design of Soviet systems of that type made by 70s, probably 60s. That's why this enormous, how should I put it, legal technology sucking, I would say, yeah, because many things you could buy. Not everybody knows that MiG during the war in Korea were powered by first the batch of engines bought from Britain and then assembled legally. This is what it was not KGB which stole Rolls-Royce engine, but they sold it, you know. So then US showed them, and twice as much during their intervention in Egypt. But so COCOM also tried to do what it could, but Soviets still could find sometimes illegal loopholes. For example, air traffic control for Olympics. I'm speaking not about Sochi ones, obviously, the Moscow ones in the 80s, was prepared by Swedish company with lots of US components. Afterwards, US ruined this company, yeah, but the air traffic control was working until almost now. That's why these success, which Soviets and Russian are very happy and very proud since '95 that CPRI labeled them #2 on the world market as far as the arms supplier, and often adding right behind the US, right behind the US. Lots of success inside of these is Russians and Soviets, they due to foreign assistance. And to my mind, the role of intelligence agencies, which so to speak stole everything, is a minor to compare to legal routes of getting access to technologies. Yeah? And even now, for example, when I hear from some Russian decision makers and observers, oh, we should tell our intelligence agency to stall something as they did in 70s, 80s, I always smile inside myself that technologies became extremely complicated, and even if you stole a sample, who would be recipient? Who will suck? Yeah? Who will digest this technology? In Soviet time, there was this kind of system, yeah? At least under that regime, relatively effective. Now, to whom to give? Who would adopt? Who will indigenize the sample? Yeah. This is a little bit of introduction for you to understand that if I'm not mentioning this thing every second time during the thesis which I would be developing further, these things are always with us. Yeah. So if we look for modern Russian defense industry, modern Russia inherited up to 85–87% of defense industrial facilities, mass production, design bureaus, labs, Academy of Science, affiliated things. Other 10, 13, 15% was largely in Ukraine and in Belarus. So sometimes a little bit in Central Asian republics, but the majority of what inherited by Central Asian Republic and Baltics, it was duplicated in Soviet time. In fact, to tell the truth, the only non-duplicated thing, and now it's a big, big string for Russian defense build-up, this is the helicopter engine. Helicopter engines are made in Zaporozhye on Motor Sich. And the funny thing that in Soviet time, Zaporozhye, being a provincial city, kind of lost an apparat competition to the other centers of gravity of engine design, like Perm, because if you make a big engine, you get big decoration. If you make a small engine, you have small decoration. That's why the plant in Omsk, which was producing the helicopter engines of previous generation, wanted to get rid of this small stuff for which you cannot get here of Soviet Union, yeah, or here of socialist labor, and they gave it to provincial Zaporozhye. And then Soviet Union broken up, like in Bible, and the last became the first, yeah. And apart from helicopter engines, they also do short resource engines for missiles, and they also do big engines, D-18 for Antonov 124 Ruslan. That's why now when I see the Syrian Express working so extensively to Latakia, all this thing and what we would be doing, then the resource would be over, yeah? The fleet would be grounded. So, they inherited quite substantial number of defense industry. And basically, starting from 95, 93 probably even, to 2005-7, it depends how you count, 12 years, 13 years, probably 14 years, we largely had what we call in Russia procurement vacations. Russian armed forces was not buying very much of the hardware, especially for the conventional armed forces. And political power, including President Yeltsin, right after his re-election in 95, blessed the lie down of the new series of submarines with intercontinental ballistic missile, Borei class 955, with Bulava. And I think the majority of funds for nuclear deterrent was consumed by this and by Topol M and other, including Sarmat. There was a nice article about Sarmat in the Moscow Defense Brief. And the rest of the sums were given to things which were considered to be critical for national security, like, I don't know, cryptology. Cryptology is always Yovan, yeah, you never co-share cryptology. Or was given to design bureaus to develop a prototype. For example, Russian armed forces was financing Invas jet trainer, but not to the extent come to the prototype. That's why they teamed up with Italians, constructed, then shared, then split, first co-shared and then split intellectual property right, and now we have two advanced jet trainers very similar to each other. Yeah. At the same time, Yakovlev Design Bureau, being very low resource, tried to earn a little bit more, and they also co-design advanced jet trainer for People's Republic of China, L-15, and it was powered with Zaporozhye engines. Yeah, that's why there are in many Ukrainian or in many Chinese, so to speak, indigenous program, you can clearly see the traces of Russian and Ukrainian participation. Yeah. So, and Russian defense industry, at least the conventional part, survived due to export orders. I remember for several years, starting from 97, when we at CAST was working on this issue, we was asking the representative of Corps of Directors of Defense Industrial Enterprise, and what about internal procurement? And they always told, internal procurement is myth. I said, if internal procurement is myth, Russian sovereignty is myth, yeah? But they largely survived on export orders. We always like to joke due to two oxygen pillows, one called India, another one called China. But the situation start gradually changing by 95, 96, when oil prices went up. Yeah, then barrel hit 50. Russian authorities could allocate rather big sums for internal procurement. And starting from 2007, now we have more or less normal situation. Then 30-35% of the majority of defense industrial enterprises, they produce war weapons for foreign customers. And 65–70% they produce for national armed forces. For example, this is the case of Tactical Missile Corporation, yeah? The leading producer of air-to-air, air-to-ground missiles and torpedoes now after the reforming. But some enterprises still, at certain years, can go up to 55–60% peaking as far as the arms export concerned. So, as for ownership, during the early 90s and even till I think 2005, we saw a process of privatization and appearing of the new actors, privately owned actors, like Transas, like AFK Sistema, producing performance systems and being either largely privately owned or entirely owned. For example, the plant which was producing attack helicopters, Mi-28, Mi-35, and the big beast Mi-26 was completely privatized. State had 0 shares, yeah? Management privatized it. But by the end of second term of Putin, we saw the process of deprivatization. And in certain cases, it was de facto nationalization and sometimes even almost expropriation of some successful state-run enterprises. That's why now, it's the privately owned enterprises. Now the Russian defense industry is largely state-run. And it peaked with the creation of Российские технологии, which was recently rebranded as a Rostec. So we always call that, reminding the phrase of Senator McCain that Russia is a gas station pretending to be a country. We always like to joke that Rostec, this is the shadow Ministry of Defense Industry, which is pretending to be a corporation, yeah? Or kind of holding of corporations. So now I think almost 65–70% of Russian defense industry is under the umbrella of Rostec. In Rostec there are more than dozen, it depends how to count, some of them already successful, some of them just a label of defense industrial holdings, and there are holdings which has nothing in common with defense industry, like pharmaceutical holding, which is a part of Rostec empire, having no connection to defense industry. So it's a kind of mega chaebol of South Korea type. To best of my knowledge, not extremely efficient and effective. Yeah. So this is as far as the ownership programs. When we are looking for legacy of early 90s, all defense companies at a certain extent tried to develop civil production. Yeah? Understanding that to compare to Cold War times, the real money there on open market, not on governmental funds. And many companies rushed into this adventure. The most known example is Sukhoi being a fighter jet maker, doing at the same time 5th generation aircraft, decided to develop a regional aircraft, Sukhoi Superjet 100. So they managed to sell several dozens of aircraft, but the project commercially is a big failure. Yeah? The same story with light helicopters, Ansat, big commercial failure. And the result is that people, that civilian technologies are more sophisticated than military ones, at least in our case. And if during the Cold War time we had this process of spin-off, from military to civilian industry, internet, like you name it. Now, when you see a commercial airliner producing thousands of pieces, all these composites and other things which develop for commercial market, they spin into defense industry. And this is not kind of our case. That's why kind of commercially all these projects of pure civilian thing developed in defense industry is a failure. There is one example It's air traffic control systems, which developed by the biggest Russian corporation Almaz-Antey, which produces S-300, S-400, Tor, Buk, air defense systems. But here, they signed the secret ukaz decree of President Putin that since the foreign systems can be bugged, so we cannot buy from Lockheed Martin, from Thales, from Indra, we're supposed to develop indigenously. So it was their particular Soviet Russian type of doing rivalry on the carpet, you know, like. So that's why they get these funds, but it's still, if not defense, but government funds, yeah, government and defense. There were several attempts, interesting attempts to team up with the foreign companies as far as the producing civilian and dual-use products. The most interesting examples was the Irkut Corporation trying to team up with the ADS, what is now known as Airbus Industry, used to be ADS. Saturn Corporation teaming up with Snecma, developing an engine SM-146 for Sukhoi Superjet. There were some other examples in space. All of them at the end of story failed due to internal Russian programs and now due to sanctions. Yeah, that it's forbidden for foreign companies to do it. There are some exceptions, and Russians are trying to replace foreign companies from West with, let's say, technologically advanced companies from not West, yeah, namely from China, but also partially from Singapore, partially from some other countries like Republic of Korea, sometimes Turkey, but they're just at the beginning of the road, and only time will show whether these attempts would be successful or not. So, as for new trends, today and future, what future gives, what future holds. Financial sanctions, Western technological sanctions, finance sanctions. If before Russian banks could have taken cheap money on the West and resell this money, let's say, via national channel to defense industry for higher price but still bearable, now this business is over. And Russian companies are very dependent on whether state can support them directly or indirectly, and all what state can do only if budget is full. And budget is full if Rosneft, Lukoil, and Gazprom pay taxes, yeah, and they pay high taxes if oil prices are up, yeah, and but since no one can forecast oil prices, that's why the future is extremely volatile, yeah, and we don't know what the future holds. We only know that this process of closing up of Russian defense industry, kind of autarkization, keep going, and we can't say that this is really the trend which leads to the success. The problems, these problems were indirectly confirmed by Russian authorities, who for many years, like for many months, like mantra repeated, no problem, yeah, we will overcome, yeah. That we were supposed to launch a new state armament program next year. Recently, it was openly declared that the state armament program 2016-2025 will not enter in force because due to macroeconomic uncertainties, we are unable to forecast. That's why we stopped even elaborating this program. Yeah. The funny thing that state armament program, it's a little bit all this was an ideal to which authorities tend to reach. Then some newspaper guys write like, the program failed. The program failed. First program failed, let's say 70%. We achieved only 30% of the fulfillment. Second program, 50. This current 70. This is more or less the idea of state armament program. You will never achieve it 100% because many things, it's like a little bit briefing. For example, there were 2 Mistrals. Now there is 1 billion US dollars for Mistrals. You can send them on something else. there were several dozens of Antonov 70 medium transport aircraft. There is no Antonov 70, you have an economization. That's why when people are judging about state armament program, they should understand how this thing functions. Yeah, it functions differently to many countries. Basically, now the second half of current state armament program, because it was from 2011-2020, is fulfilled on an annual basis. And both President Putin and Deputy Prime Minister Rogozin, Putin, like the day before yesterday during the gathering on Ministry Industrial Commission, said that all figures as far as the numbers are the same, and all figures as far as the rubles are the same, which gives us, since now with the ruble you can buy much less when you could have bought 2 years ago, and even at that time it was over-optimistic, it's absolutely clear that would be less tanks constructed, less aircraft, less defense systems, under the condition that would be no sequestration of defense budget, as we saw it many times under Yeltsin. Yeah? And now there is a big fight of these defense industrial enterprises and conglomerates, also under the carpet, to whom state will give on top. Yeah? And now everybody tries to explain that without main battle tank, you will not survive. Or without radioelectronic warfare, yeah, we will lose. Look what this bastard US does, yeah? Or how the example of war in Iraq shows you need this. So without air defense, you are Yugoslavia. They come and pacify you with a sword and with the fire. And sometimes we see the splashes of these PR and lobbying activity in Russian press. That's why sometimes don't be surprised when you see like, wow, something absolutely, this is part of this game. As for arms exports, since it's also key expertise, we are preaching and cast for almost a decade that it will decrease, that it's only increasing. I think it's increasing due to several reasons. One of them, Putin is a personal salesman. And when you're a salesman as a president, it helps. Yeah? And really salesman, not like US a little bit salesman, French a little bit. French became good salesmen only under Hollande. And we saw exactly. Yeah, but under Hollande, Chirac sold no Rafale. Hollande sold 48 Rafale, you know. Second, US with its ITAR and many things, many people who would welcome US stuff to buy, they will not buy it. Or sometimes I always like to joke that people love US, but only one time. For example, Poles. After having so much problems with F-16, after service, magic black boxes, so all those who are in defense industry knows this problematic of ITAR liberalization for joint development. Another reason that Chinese could not offer a reliable alternative to Russian things because they're either not on the level or they're dependent on Russian components. Yeah, like for example, fighter jets, they're dependent on Russian engines. And European equipment was extremely expensive, you know. But now, I think the saturation of the majority of Russian market, which could buy Russian weapons because they also had oil and gas revenues, Algeria, for example. I think that Algeria will not be buying such a big number of things. So Venezuela is over. Many other markets which traditionally used to be somehow our markets, now we see diversification. For example, Vietnam. Yes, Vietnam is still buying the lion's share of stuff from Russia, but also buying from Israel, from France, non-lethal stuff from US. China tries to buy internally. As for India, there is a very harsh competition on India, and Russia having very severe. Russia is still contracting more than before, but because the Indian market going as far as the figures, we're still going up, but as for the share, our share shrinks on Indian market. So this is like basically it, and I would be happy to respond to your questions. Sorry for being not extremely academic.
No, thanks a lot, Ruslan. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. I'm going to turn it over for a couple minutes for some comments to Keith Crane here before I open up the floor for questions. Keith, if you could help us.
Sure. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I like your first quote, Russia's never as strong as it looks, but never as weak as it looks as well, and I think this pertains to the arms industry. Russia kind of is in this group of, what a group of three I would call, India, China, and Russia, where nowhere near U.S. In terms of procurement size or production size, not as sophisticated as European, but definitely heads and shoulders above the rest of the world's armament industry. I think if you look at Western Europe, the United States, and those three countries, you don't find anybody else who's even, even close. I think the question is how does Russia stay where it is? As you mentioned, national procurement has gone up. The Russian economy is in recession this year, may emerge next year, but then both at the Ministry of Economy, Central Bank of Russia, and IMF forecast very, very slow growth going forward. So, so the question is that what does this industry have to build on? I think there's, I think there's in a difficult competitive situation. First, both India and China are China in particular, are desperately trying to cut their ties to the Russian industry. They're making some progress, not as rapidly as they'd like to. I think the other issue that you have with the Russian industry is this kind of move back to what I see as kind of Soviet-style trusts. We have had this, I like your statement, deprivatization. So where you had a industry that was dramatically downsized, but also became much more market-focused in the 90s and the early part of last decade. Now that we're moving back to, instead of everything for export, which I think kept them on their toes, where state procurement has run 2/3 or so of sales, that we're kind of gravitating back to a more, at least, state-focused industry than the past. These big state-controlled companies, I think there's in many instances, they aren't really like Western companies, because the CEO really can't hire and fire people in the constituent enterprises. The enterprises, as in the Soviet era, were very strong, continue to be so. The other issue that is now different from the past is they're state-controlled but not state-owned. In modern Russia, all of these managers like to be able to get shares as bonuses, however they get them, and then be able to sell those on the private market. So what has been intriguing, at least to me, is that even during this, what I would call renationalization phase, or better, deprivatization, we still see remnants of private equity in those companies in order for the managers to get wealthy. So what comes next? I think the areas where we're seeing some difficulties is, first, in contrast to the Soviet industry. I know they inherited or procured technology, but foreign technology is an integral part of a lot of Russian systems. Now, I heard a factoid, don't know if it's true or not, but 70% of the chips used in Russian systems come from abroad. I would be surprised if it isn't something like that. And so you have an industry where the products have gotten better, in part because of their ability to procure Western or foreign components in areas where they're not as good. But and sanctions won't completely be able to cut that off. But it's an industry that is being hit in terms of sanctions. It's an industry that's facing increasing competition, or, if you will, a desire by key clients to reduce purchases. And it's an industry that has enjoyed this period of increased domestic procurement, but an industry in which I don't see that increasing dramatically. I think finally one of the issues that I really see in this industry is that Russia still tries to do everything. And given the size of the procurement budget, everything from renovating the nuclear force to talking about bombers and air defense and new fighters and new tanks and submarines and and new naval vessels, with the budgets that are on offer, that's not going to happen. And I think that's going to have an overall kind of debilitating effect on the industry. That said, going back to your quote, nonetheless, it's one of the top 5 industries in the world, and it shows no sign of really, folding in the near future.
Thank you very much, Keith. I'm going to take a little bit of moderator's privilege and ask the first question because I doubt I'm going to get the opportunity to ask any more while I have Ruslan here. Keith concluded on an important note that Russia still tries to do everything. Clearly, that's not going to be in the cards budget-wise. In fact, frankly, probably never was. I think the state armament program, as was designed, was probably about 70% plus backloaded, meaning all the big expenditures were supposed to be somewhere in the distant fantasy land future, and about 30% were going to be practically realized in the coming next several years. But so I kind of have a question for you, which is, do you see any sort of emerging priorities, or is the outcome going to essentially be based on a competition between the different services and defense industries, depending on who has the best friends? Reading a lot of CAS work, one clearly comes away with the impression that you're not too enthused about all the money that's been invested in the Russian Navy. And as we understand, not only are there big problems with the helicopter engines for Motor Siege, obviously very big problems for the Navy shipbuilding program, particularly in the frigate class, right, with all the engines that were supposed to come to from Ukraine, and just a couple engines that were supposed to come from Germany, but there is clearly a Ukrainian engine problem as well in the shipbuilding industry. So could you perhaps share some of your insights on what you think, how priorities are going to be decided? Will they be decided, or will they emerge out of some kind of primitive infighting process? What are your thoughts?
I think that priorities would be chosen in 2 different ways. Yeah, for example, before we saw presentation of Armata, main battle tank concept car. Yeah, on the Red Square at 90s was a question whether we're supposed to develop T90, which is a deep modernization of T72, or T80. Yeah, gas turbine tank. In fact, the choice was done by Indian Army, which chose T90, and then still T80, but then Algerians bought T90, and that's it. Main battle tank of Russia is T90. That's why I think in the future we'll return to these paradigms. Certain types of the equipment would be chosen for us by foreign customer. Yeah, obviously no one will recognize it openly, but all those who have had could understand it. Yeah. Second thing, there is a deep sympathy in Russian society vis-a-vis Navy. Deep blue Navy. But every time then there's a problem, Navy, we are not talking about submarines with ICBMs. Yeah. This is like святое. Yeah. As French people say, sacré. Yeah. And so all these programs will put on hold. And the funny thing that, okay, frigates, they were seriously about to launch construction of a destroyer, leader of a new generation starting from next year. And now I don't hear anyone asking which yard will be chosen. Like everybody forgot about it. That's why in a natural way, I always like to compare Russian ambitions with the paddle. Yeah, there is a autumn, but it's still according by itself, not minus. Yeah, paddle is big, minus at night, paddle small. Your ambition suddenly, it's like the same, but like 1.3, 1.5 smaller. Yeah, that's why I think Navy. I think the rationalization of the choice among the types of the aircraft in armed forces or in air forces is inevitable. Because now it's like in Soviet times, Su-30 SM, Su-30 MKK, Su-35, T-50, and probably a little bit of this, and a little bit of this military transport aircraft, all these fantasies. Now only Indians can afford themselves to have such a zoo in the Air Force. Even Americans cannot afford themselves. Obviously, Russians also can't. Yeah. I think the lobbying very much, but now it's mostly not the branches of the army. Although, apart from current defense minister, I think the only military, not security guy, not a guy with a military background, but Mil who has direct access to president and influence. This is General Shamanov, you know, head of VDV. And that's why one of the reasons why he managed to preserve all this ridiculous program of development of the equipment for VDV. Because we always say that, to tell the truth, you're great guys, a little bit like Marines here, legacy, but you are elite infantry. Yeah, that's why you don't need tank to parachute, because all these things which you was done. So you came from Pukhov, you landed in Beslan, and when you rushed to Georgia and came before the infantry, yeah, and you were not even helicopter, because at that time the engines were so weak that they could not overflow the mountains. So probably him, since he likes so much to have equipment different, like here, Marines, like many things which Marines buy, like from Norway, like, no, you know. But it's a little bit a kind of local deviation, yeah, local fantasy. I don't think that it will really consume lots of money, you know, like. I don't know whether I replied on your question, Michael. Or
No, yeah, and I saw recently Shamanov's pushing to get the VDV enlarged from 45,000 up to 60,000. My only comment on purpose of VDV of infantry, I don't know if you noticed, but in Ukraine, they're now adding a T-80 tank regiment to each VDV airborne brigade, which is a different way of doing things, but maybe interesting model.
I'm absolutely sure that special operation forces will, all what they want, they will get, yeah, because this, so to speak, success in Crimea and this model, which largely was inspired US by General Makarov, I think these people will get their proper funding.
Okay.
Including foreign equipment that you'll buy. How? It's not a topic of my presentation, and this is not the subject which we really study.
All right. Now, sort of the chief moderator technologist here. I'm going to open up to the floor. Please wait for the microphone. Identify yourself, and try to stick to the topic at hand. First, Leon, and then you, sir. Sorry, Ariel. And then you, sir.
Thank you, Joe. Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. Real quick, Rogozin versus Shoigu versus Putin, you mentioned Shamanov. Who are the conceptual big thinkers here? Is this driven by bureaucratic politics, geopolitical vision, realistic assessment of the technological base as a part of technological base? What is the condition of the personnel and the education base? We've heard for many years that the personnel in the defense industry is getting older. We're also hearing a lot of complaints that the education base is declining. And to what extent the involvement in Syria do you think you'll be driving the technology and the model selection agenda for the foreseeable future?
5 questions in one, yeah. So Syria, I have no idea, to tell the truth, absolutely. Not we just exchange, like, so there are some allegations, like, but they are not PC on camera, yeah. So as for example, age, this is a little bit mantra which overestimated. All the defense enterprises which I visit, quite good people. So there is no this like someone 70 years old. No. So there are relatively substantial number of youngers like young, and youngers of like 35. They always say, as far as the engineers, there is a gap. There are people 25 years old, there are people 35 years old, and there are people 60 years old. But there is no people 45, 30, 50, 55. There is this gap in engineering. This problem I see. Many things which are done by people in Russian industry now can be done by the machines. At least until embargo, you buy a precision tool and it works better than young, old. Now, whether you would be able to buy these precision tools, yeah. For example, in one of the oldest issues of Moscow Defense Brief, an author discussed the purchase of the precision tools for for Votkinsky Zavod, which makes Bulava, which makes Topol and makes Iskander. 70% of Park fleet is foreign made. And foreign made, not China. US, Czech Republic, France. So whether all these tools would be sold to Russia, that it's continue to work on the missiles which headed on the US, big question mark. Yeah? Whether they can be able to replace, yes. All, no. Part, yes. As for influence, Rogozin, Shoigu, Putin, so there are lots of allegations, but I really don't know. I know that Rogozin was returned back because after the events on 11th for protest against Putin, yeah, and for rotation of and power, public policy returned. And I always like to joke that Putin can cry on one rally, but cannot cry on every rally. No, pro-Putin rally, someone should go and say, like, we all for Vladimir Vladimirovich. And this is nice if it would be someone from the government, but not from Putin's entourage, because they are all not public figures. You know, they are all not very bright to make kind of pro-Putin activism. But once again, it's just my personal impression. That's why Rogozin could have been given a label of Deputy Prime Minister for Agriculture or for horse riding. So he was given a label for defense industry. But once again, it's like a little bit of speculation. That's why I don't know why he was chosen. And obviously his influence is less on Putin than influence of Shoigu. It's enough to see the pictures, you know, and how they sit during the events.
Not influence of Putin, influence on the military technology procurement and role in the military industrial complex.
I think that sorry, English is not my native language. For you, Ariel, it's much easier. Yeah? You live here. Sorry, I failed to understand. I think that Shoigu is very much continue the, let's say, Serdyukov line. Otherwise, he doesn't like to recognize it vis-a-vis defense industry. You are behind the schedule. You are expensive. And the quality is going down. But if before on Serdyukov there was an alternative, you could go for Mistral, you could refuse, you could put on hold. Now there is an enemy by the gate, you must buy. That's why there is a constant fight under the carpet. So under Serdyukov it was public, under Shoigu this is not public, but the tensions are the same. And for example, I don't know how to say буксир по-английски, то, что выводит. Tugboat. For example, tugboats, you can order them United Shipbuilding Corporation, but they prefer to order it to small privately owned shipyard Pella because they always say, and I've heard it from officials, they are on time, they are on price, and good quality. And all these state-run conglomerate, just opposite. But these alternatives, they are not so many of them, you know, like nuclear-powered submarine can be constructed only on Sevmash, and that's it.
Keith, can you?
Yeah,
jump in on this?
just one comment. Often one hears in the States, in Europe too, about, oh, this industry, everybody's old, and therefore we got a big problem coming ahead. Those industries tend to be relatively high-paying, and their industries have gone through a lot of technological change, so they haven't hired people in time. But if you look at the auto industry, kind of gone through that, and there was a lot of younger people who wanted to step in, and so the market kind of takes care of that. And I would argue in Russia too that as long as they pay well, the numbers are not so extraordinary that you couldn't get those from Russian schools.
Okay, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Joe, question right behind you.
David Colton with the Ijuar Group. My question relates to the experience of conversion in the 1990s and the current drive, whether it's Glaziev's report to Patrushev recently at the State Security Council on economic organization. Specifically, you had mentioned the nostalgia for some of the Soviet economic and technical achievements in the 80s and 70s. But we know that in the 1990s, the hopes of conversion that the technology in the defense sectors could be used to help stabilize and increase the Russian Federation commercial economic sector ended in a car wreck. And my question to you is, if the drive to use the VPK as the wedge to rebuild a Ustinov light template for the rationalization of the overall Russian Federation economy, using the VPK as the commanding heights again, that assumes to me that there is a different concept of the experience of conversion, particularly if, when we look beyond the current platforms you're talking about, the Sukhois, the jets, and we're looking out to the besplatny, the UAVs, the new cyber-intensive battlefields, where they have to develop not just the existing platforms, but innovate and iterate in the new ones. Can you explain to us your concept of how the drive to recreate this Ustinov light VPK commanding heights position in the economy relates to the ability to generate that kind of innovation, not just in the VPK, but in the commercial economy, given what happened when we saw with the conversion experience? Thank you.
I'm unable to respond to this question because it's out of mandate of CAST. CAST, it's a little bit intellectual charcuterie, you know, like we sell to, like, this is a question for, I don't know, 1 million question, and so we don't do. I can give you several kind of comments and snapshots. Like, for those who are proficient in Russian, I will cite the phrase, it was a toast, yeah? Which Russian defense industry liked to rise in 70s and 80s. Кто нас балует, дебилов? Дмитрий Федорович Ustinov, yeah? Who is spoiling us cretins? Dmitry Fyodorovich Ustinov, like for giving enormous number of funds. And you know, lots of people joined VPK because they were crazy geek and it was interesting to develop something like, and you had unlimited funds, you know. Despite all what is said about Putin, we all know that this is evil, yeah? There is a market economy in Russia. It's probably economy not kind of which is similar to the United States. That's why you cannot give unlimited funds. That's why many things, when they like to repeat in upper echelons, we will do like in Soviet Union. You can't do it like in Soviet Union because Russia is not Soviet Union, at least as how economy functions, yeah? Second thing about conversion. I never studied conversion. This story was over before I joined the business. I joined it in February '96. But as for conversion, I can give you an example. A friend of CAST, who is currently CEO of Almaz Antay, when he was a chief financial officer before previous boss, he said that as a chief financial officer, I was visiting plant in Udmurtia which produced TORs, you know, short range air defense systems, which were namely sent to Iran. And I asked the CEO of this division, and what about conversion? What about civilian goods made on your plant? He said, you know, TOR and other things which we do, this is predator. And if you take shark, take all teeth of shark, we'll put it into aquarium and feed vegetarian food, it still would be a predator. That's why we produce very particular stuff, you know. So that's why how you can use, like in 95% cases, you simply cannot use it. I remember one of the line of defense of Edmund Pope when he was caught by Russian counter-espionage authorities. I had a project of civilian use of torpedo, yeah? Civilian use of torpedo. Hypothetically, probably, but how? I'm sorry, I'm not an engineer, yeah?
Flotation device for children.
Yeah, probably. That's why I really can't say more, you know.
Okay.
Maybe I wasn't precise. Let me try and rephrase it. Do you agree that since 2012, that the Russian defense sector you've been studying has been moving towards Ustinov light, whether it's Rogozin, regardless who's charging, do you agree that that's the vector that the Russian industry is recognizing it's a mixed economy, whether you want to say NEP, commanding heights, whatever, it's recognizing it's in a mixed economy. Do you agree that that's the case? And if that's the case, what then, since there aren't unlimited funds, do you see as the limiting steps to its success?
I can say that what Keith said, then the situation in a sense for innovation was better in 90s because people were doomed to going forward. Now you can simply suck until certain period of time limited money out of state budget. How long it will go, I don't know. Russian industry is not homogeneous; it's heterogeneous. That's why when I'm reading the reports that Syria is full of Russian UAVs, it makes me laugh because we are buying from Israel. And recently I saw once again there was a big festival of on Frunzinskaya Nabережная of Russian armed forces, and there were samples of the equipment, and I have it in one picture. 4 post Russian, Searcher, Mach 2. That's why in certain technologies, I think the gap is unbridgeable. You will probably develop something acceptable, let's say dominate on post-Soviet space. But it would not be acceptable to use it in Syria. And I think Syrians are using Iranian UAVs, to best of my knowledge, and partially Chinese, because them are more advanced. But once again, I am unable to respond to your question. It's too philosophic for me. Sorry.
Yeah. Just a comment. Russia's not NEP. Russia is, I think the best analogy is Tsarist times. It's really a highly marketized economy with a large state influence on specific industries and companies, but it's highly marketized. Just like the Tsarist times, it was state-owned industry is very, very important, but it's much more integrated into the world economy than NEP. Okay.
Okay, gentlemen, let's move on. Hold on a second. And the earlier question, I'm going to take a couple at a time now so we can kind of speed up the conversation. One from Wayne over there, and then following will be Paul. You had one up earlier, and then Steve.
Wayne Murray, the American Foreign Policy Council. Your reference to Israel segues right into the question I wanted to ask, because in your presentation, that was a foreign arms relationship you did not talk about. And I'd like, curiously enough, Netanyahu is in Moscow today, and among the things they're going to be talking about, obviously, will be defense cooperation, because this is quite important for some firms in Israel. My question to you, how do you see that relationship developing? The impact of the United States sanctions. I mean, Washington is trying to get Israel not to cooperate in this sector. Obviously, Israeli firms do want to do this business. It's a relationship that is not, shall we say, given much attention here in Washington for political reasons. But I'd like your thoughts as to how you see that external arms and technology relationship developing.
Okay, great question, Wayne. Paul?
Thank you. Paul Schwartz, CSIS. My question has to do with innovation. Of course, under the Soviet regime, there was a very vast network of design bureaus and academic institutions involved in that, and that suffered significantly after the collapse. I'm wondering how much actually has been retained and how capable it is now in terms of driving innovation in the Russian defense industry.
Okay, thanks. And last, I'll take Steve for this round.
Stephen Blank, American Foreign Policy Council. My question has to do with arms sales. Do you see any difficulties arising for Russia from the fact that states like China, South Korea, Israel, and even maybe perhaps others down the road are increasingly competitive with it in the arms sales markets and are cutting into Russian markets?
Okay, thanks. So, Ruslan, Keith, we got a question from Wayne on the relationship with Israel and the state of cooperation between Russia and Israel, one from Paul on state of innovation and design bureaus, and one from Steve on current situation on arms sales.
So as for Israel, obviously Israelis are interested in their defense industry producing up to 70% things for export, but we all know that Israel is extremely dependent from the United States. And in a sense, as far as the technology is more dependent, for example, than the Republic of Korea. You know, Koreans, in certain, their leash is longer than Israelis ones. And I think Israelis are very cautious after Harpy scandal with China. That's why certain things can be done. But there are still very strong, let's say, anti-Russian lobby within. So if Netanyahu is positive, he is partially positive because he's negative about Barack Obama, yeah? Amos Gilad is not Russophile, you know. He was against the sale of searchers, you know, and many people are not quite happy to cooperate with Soviets, as I like to joke. And another problem of Israel, that if you look defense industry of Israel, in fact, it's split in two big categories. There is a big four, Elbit, Israeli aerospace industry, Rafael, and Israeli military industry. And there are up to 200 venture firms doing some kludge, which you'd never know because it was never tested. That's why sometimes the problem, like Spike, is a great stuff, but poles, after they took it, works in desert, doesn't work when it's humid and there's a fog in Poland. That's why Israel, it's like this story about hamster and rat. What's the difference? Public relations is good. You know, my public relations agency is better, says hamster, yeah, to rat. The same, like there is a great PR about Israeli weapons, but sometimes it's very good it's tailored for their theater of war. Sometimes even if you can get it, for example, was a huge problems with searcher on the polar stuff, you know, it's frozen, you know, it doesn't give data somewhere in Syktyvkar, yeah, and they did improvements, but I still don't know whether they really achieved. That's why, like, Israeli question without Russian-Israeli cooperation, there are lots of kind of, as we call it, второе дно, третье дно, like second, third level, like an iceberg, which you don't see. But this is also a part of the negotiation process. As for innovation in modern Russia, good question. No answer, to tell the truth. Because so many interesting things were done in Soviet Union. I mean, basic research. And in fact, based on this basic research, Russia lived 25 years post-Soviet Union, yeah? Whether there is a new batch of basic research which can, new materials, for example, for hypersonic air-to-air missiles, I don't know. Probably yes, but likely not. Probably yes, but not in all areas, yeah? But once again, glass is half full or half empty. To dominate on post-Soviet space, it's enough. Yeah, we'll be always better than any of our neighbor. And probably our missiles, nuclear deterrent missiles, are not that precise as US, but it's precise enough.
Close enough.
To, in the center of New York, in the center of Seattle, like big cities, like deterrent to keep US far. Sorry for being not PC. Yeah.
Steve also had a question.
Yeah,
on
Stephen,
arms.
Stephen, you are right, but not, as French people say, vous avez raison, mais pas tout à fait. You know, we always preach that Chinese will eat us, Chinese will eat it. Yes, godless bastards come and take our markets. In fact, there are two places where they really overcome us. One is Pakistan, but we never came to Pakistan seriously because of India. And where we really allowed them to take something. Yeah, allowed not in the sense give a permission, but we left this, for example, some platforms in Algeria, yeah, they took from Italians, from this, from that. They either have nothing to offer so far, because pitching their air defenses, they keep buying from Russia, or we keep them by the balls because the engines are our one. And so who want to buy a Chinese fighter jet? Come to talk to us. Mm-hmm. That's why this threat, we expected that it will materialize like 10 years ago. It still hasn't materialized. And studying defense industry, we understood for many enterprises, 95% business is civil. And defense industry is 5%, and they use it for prestige, to go to Central Party Committee to talk. And they are not that interesting to pitch their weapons, despite what here in US, Dragon Jump, Dragon Rise, all these crappy publications. So they do their business. They are not that crazy about selling something to Bangladesh. If it happens, fine. If it's not, 95% of our business is not defense and not defense trade for these big conglomerates. It's not a stake. For Russians, it's a stake. For Israelis, it's stake. For Chinese, not. And Republic of Korea is very dependent on US, and many things like manpads, Russian, Vitis S-330, you know, Angara, booster, so like cooperation. So they mostly buying technologies from us because, not because they like us. Obviously they hate us. Koreans hate everybody, you know. But US doesn't give them. They're so damn frustrated that being close as the life, fighting side by side, US doesn't give them a minor things. So, and some technologies, French simply cannot give them. SAMPT is not mature. Okay, helicopter they did with French, you know. That's why this problem probably will come. For example, Yonja doing a speedy boats already several times overcome Dalmas, but like it's a small portion, yeah. It's a small market, small niche, that every big country can have an interesting something of its own, a niche. If economy is big enough, you know, there is all these talented innovators.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ruslan. Let me take the next batch of questions. The gentleman over here, and then will be the lady back there.
Thank you. I'm Vasile Rotaru, Fulbright visiting researcher at Georgetown University. My question is about Russian military reform, which is ongoing. Is it more slowed by Western sanctions or by the frozen relationship with Ukraine? And since summer last year, has Russia made any progress in building infrastructure in order to duplicate the military equipment Russia used to import from Ukraine? Thank you.
Okay, good question. And lady back there.
I'm Sylwia Szawowska from the Polish Embassy. Just two brief questions. First of all, if you were to sum up the weakest and strongest point of the Russian defense industry now and in short-term prognosis. And the second one, what opportunities there are for defense industry, Russian defense industry, in terms of releasing Iranian sanctions and cooperation with Iran?
Great questions. Ruslan, why don't you go first?
To tell the truth, I don't understand really the question because there is defense industry and there is a military. And this is like making film and showing film in a movie theater. It's all called film, but it's two different business.
Modernizing army, Russian army, to which extent?
So you're focused on modernization, not really the reform process, right? The question is really about Russian modernization and defense.
Military build-up, yeah? So Ukrainian-made engines is extremely important issue, helicopter engines. But on Klimov plant, we still do 100 engines. That's why, in a sense, all civil users would be saying this, would be shown this, and military will grab all the engines, yeah? Or would be confiscation of, in case of war, yeah? That's why, like, then there is a wartime and pre-war time, it's different from peacetime. When we are speaking about Western sanctions, the general stagnation in the Russian economy, for example, I hope that majority of Russian decision makers in defense industry who pay costs directly and indirectly will not seeing this life and record. We never say it publicly, but in private interaction with Russian military establishment, we say let it be less tanks, but let be wages, military mortgage for personnel would be high. Because at the end of the story, this is people who fight, not iron. And we see it in Ukraine, you know, that the most horrible things, it's not the rotten and completely obsolete equipment, it's people who suffered this war. Yeah, and the next war is, that's why we think that investing in human capital is much more important than buy an extra ICBM. Yeah, but previous leadership of defense industry and of Minister of Defense understand it very well. The current looks like understanding. So the guys who was before, there is Soviets like prayed tank. Their god was hardware. That's why Soviet Union was full of extremely performant military equipment, but people were, let's say, not very well paid, living in terrible conditions. Now there is this, as we call it, humanization of armed service, process. I think they understand it. And from this point of view, not so much impact. If you stop with obsession that we need a 1 million army, and it looks like they stopped, they still claim it, but they are in a sense happy with 800,000. Yeah, like if you can keep them and feed them, probably would be no one more World Cup. So probably they will sacrifice some fancy events like World Expo. But I don't think that giving Russian tradition would be economizing on armed forces.
Can I just briefly add to his question about this issue of Ukraine? So, you know, obviously Russia spoke optimistically, like, oh, maybe we can replace this Ukrainian engine production in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Obviously, it could take quite a while. The other side of that coin is, though, what is Motor Sich in Ukraine going to do? So they have a couple options. Maybe they can sell these engines through Belarus to Russia. Maybe they can sell some of these ship engines. If Russia plans to export, let's say, the frigates to India, for example, then Ukrainians might allow to, you know, bypass sanctions and sell the engines that way. But if you look at some Ukrainian industries, like Yuzhmash, I think, is basically done. I think they're going to go bankrupt.
Many things.
I mean, what are they going to do? How? It's just kind of your take. I want to double down a bit on this question. So on the one hand, it's pretty clear that domestic substitution of Ukrainian engine production is probably going to take much longer than the Russian government expects. On the other hand, how long can Ukraine keep this up before these sort of prime jewels of Ukrainian defense industry go dead?
You know, if we look at defense industry, is it a burden or it can feed itself? Yes, it can partially feed itself, but in a sense, it's a burden of sovereignty. Let's take Polish example. You can quit smoking and start smoking. You can quit drinking and start drinking. But once you quit producing defense industrial material, you cannot return on the market. And since Poles for 15 years took a pose, and now we see like all this stuff, Kielce, nice, the pavilion, which looks like a nightclub, but I'm sure, sorry, the technologies, so you would be buying foreign technologies, even if you will put some nice cherry on top, yeah? Nino Borzhanadze, after they came with Saakashvili to power, said, we will never produce military hardware, but probably our violinist would be good on the world market. Some sane people understand it. I think some sane people in Ukraine understand that this industry you should sacrifice to join. And vice versa. The countries which wish to develop independent foreign and defense policy, not necessarily anti-US, because Republic of Korea is not anti-US, they wish indigenous. Turkey wish indigenous. And all who has the potential, look Brazil with all their terrible mess, they're trying, everybody tries to to develop its defense industry. Some can afford themselves, some can't. Some keep doing. Obviously, when you look what first Brazilians did, Bandeirante was like shit. Now quite Tucana powered by US. Yeah. Yeah, but Super Tucan and the others. That's why, like, defense industry, I think Russia, if Russia will stay as a power, no matter in upper league, as Russia claim, or in first, second league, Russia will have a substantial part of defense industry. Iran also, no matter reconciliation with the West, they will try to do their indigenous defense industry.
And briefly, for our Polish colleagues' question, what is the strength, right, of Russia's defense industry?
Can you once again repeat? Sorry, I like.
Yeah, track. If I recall correctly, the question was about what is the strength of Russia's defense industry today.
Strengths and weaknesses now and in couple
strength
of
and weaknesses.
Iran.
It's not easy to do a SWOT analysis, right, like of hands. The strength of Russian defense industry that Soviet Union and previous decades of our ancestors invested so massively that no matter the consequence, still there is something. And certain things, for example, if you take a heavy aircraft, you know, you can either buy it from US, F-15, and US are not selling it to everybody. They sell it only to its very closest and rich allies. Japan, Saudi Arabia, Republic of Korea, so Poles cannot afford themselves, too expensive. Or if air defense, either Patriot or S300 or S400. You know, now probably SAM PT. So sometimes if you wish to buy, if you need something for yourself, who can help, apart from Russians, to build Indians' nuclear-propelled submarine? You know, US? Probably France. Yeah? No, only Russia. So we are the only. Probably this is like not an ideal offer, but I'm sorry, take it or leave it. And this is a big advantage. Disadvantage, state-run, not very efficient. How should I put it? Very much thinking about we are not only producing the equipment. I remember it was an open interview. I was shocked. I said, probably we should erase it. No, 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 you should keep it. The head of Tactical Missile Corporation said on record, if state wish that 25,000 my workers stay unemployment and I don't know, basically stop to support Vladimir Vladimirovich, they probably can halt production. But if they wish stability, people, jobs, blah, 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 so it's a little bit, defense industry also kind of a little bit of charity in Russia. They try to reconcile. So I exaggerate, yeah, I criticize to extreme, because here there is no possibility to elaborate further, but it's a little bit what in Poland they tried to do in the 90s, like to keep it afloat, being ineffective, but failed at the end of the story, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Ruslan. Okay, next batch of questions. Anybody willing here in the audience? Haven't turned to yet.
And Iran, you know, Iran is a very complicated issue. I don't think that Iranians will rush buying lots of things now, simply because not to irritate the United States and because they need this money for civil economy. Some things they will buy. I think they're very much interested in not combat systems, which Russians produce and produce very good. But as for big contracts for, let's say, main battle tanks, aircraft, sanctions are still working, yeah. But even this, I don't think that they would be that proactive.
Can I, since we still have a bit of time, can you comment a little bit about the changing relationship with the Saudis and Egyptians? This is kind of like some new universe with Egypt buying Russian weapons equipment with money that's coming out of Saudi Arabia.
You know,
UAE, Saudi Arabia, at least stalking around Iskanders, that's probably not a serious proposition.
You know,
but what is this about?
Egypt and Saudis, it's two cases apart. Yeah. Like we cannot treat them together. With Egypt, there are three things which people forget when they see Putin and Sisi. It's a nice explanation. Two autocrats support each other. It's so sexy to believe in simple, simple things. First of all, who was the first customer for Mirage 2000? Foreign customer. It was Egypt. And this is nice to get F-16 from US for free, or this US taxpayers' money from one pocket to another, but when US said stop, human rights, you name it, it's nice to have something else. That's why I think Chinese are doomed to have a heterogeneous park of weapons. Egyptians, I'm sorry. And when everybody thinks that, oh, Sisi came, and no, if we took 10 years of Mubarak, so Mubarak was like before the fall of Mubarak and the arrival of Morsi. So the volume went up 10 times. So like saying 10 years before the fall of Mubarak, it was 80 million. And by the end of Mubarak and the first year of, because contracts they are like lagging behind, was almost $1 billion. So, but so the general public doesn't follow such details. So it was like steadily, but in 10 years, and then crescendo. And these billion and all this money, Egyptians paid from the pocket. Now, if it's Saudis or United Arab Emirates pays, why not? Yeah. So it's a kind of their logical explanation. As for Saudis, I think it's a standard Saudi bribe for loyalty. Like we buy from you, you support us. And since now we see that, как это, земля горит под ногами, yeah? The soil is burning under and they are desperately, as we call it, as a wounded cougar, going around the globe trying to offer something, to ask something, and they offer their standard gift: we will buy from you. But since they already like cheated on Russia, Russian authorities are very skeptical. But since there is a kind of pressure on Russia, why not to welcome France during Max Air show? That's why I think like Saudi case, it's a case apart. It's not defense industry, it's not arms trade, it's something else. Yeah.
No, thank you very much, Ruslan. See, Steve, this is useful information for us as we're speaking on Thursday at Paul's program. We're just going to repeat what Ruslan said in my voice later this week. Okay, are there any more questions and close out? All right, so as we sort of wrap this up, I guess 2 points of business. First, of course, to thank my dear colleague, Oya Alikar. For those that don't know, this military discussion series is a joint project between Ken Institute and RAND Corporation, and we hope to be doing, one of these every month or 2 months or so. Second, just to let you know, we have a good upcoming event on October 1st, Thursday, where Georgia's president, Georgi Margirashvili, will be here. Hopefully I didn't butcher his name. That's one of the next major upcoming Ken events. Other than that, I want to thank our two panelists, Ruslan Pukhov, of course, Keith Crane. Thank you very much for coming down here, and thank you all of you for participating this busy Monday morning. Thanks a lot, guys. Oh, yeah. Come on over. You look